Commander Rachel Renner gripped the console in front of her, staring at the swirling chaos of the battle unfolding before them. The Arceus had only just exited the unstable jump gate, and in the blink of an eye, they had found themselves in the heart of an ancient ongoing war. The stars outside were a violent blur as enemy warships, massive and unyielding, clashed in an orgy of fire and destruction. Shields at 72%. Captain, Lieutenant Carter's voice was tense, laced with urgency. "We're getting hammered." Renner's mind raced. They were unprepared. Their ship battered, their technology primitive compared to the advanced, hyper-violent warbands in the void around them. Yet despite everything, there was one truth she held on to. Humanity had always been the underdog, and that had always made them dangerous. Initiate evasive maneuvers, full throttle. Don't let them target our engines. She barked, her voice cutting through the chaos like a razor. The ship lurched as it veered sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding an incoming volley of plasma fire from one of the Seraph ships, a hulking insectoid vessel that loomed ominously just off their starboard side. The Arceus rocked again as a near miss rattled their hull, the screech of metal on metal reverberating through the ship's corridors. "They've locked on with their disruptor beams," yelled Ensign Wei from the tactical station. "If they get a hit, we're dead in the water. We can't outrun them. We have to fight back," Renner muttered under her breath. There was no option now but to use whatever they had, no matter how crude it was. Her mind raced for a solution. The humans hadn't come to the galaxy seeking war. They'd come to survive, to find a new home after Earth had been destroyed, its history and people wiped out by an unknown force. The Arceus was their last hope, but it was far from prepared for this kind of fight. Still, they had ingenuity born from desperation. They could still win this. "Deploy the pulse torpedoes. The Seraph ships don't know what hit them," she ordered. The Arceus pulse torpedoes, a last-minute modification to their limited arsenal, were designed to send out a disruptive electromagnetic pulse, capable of scrambling enemy systems. The weapons officer quickly input the commands. Within moments, a series of glowing torpedoes shot out from the ship's belly, trailing arcs of lightning as they sped toward the closest Seraph vessel. The pulse hit with devastating force. The insectoid ship shuddered violently, its weapons systems malfunctioning, and it veered off course, taking a few other ships with it in a chain reaction of confused enemy fire. "We've got their attention now," Carter said, his voice mixed with relief and disbelief. "They're backing off." But just as Renner let out a breath, a new chilling transmission came over the comms, a high-pitched, incomprehensible screech, like some form of alien battle cry. "Looks like we've just made ourselves some enemies," Renner muttered. She turned to face her senior officers. "Prepare for another wave. We can't stay here." "We're not going anywhere if we don't get our engines back online, Commander," Wei shot back. Renner's eyes narrowed. In the distance, she saw a massive ship emerge from the rubble of the battlefield. It was unlike anything she'd seen before. Sleek, powerful, and clearly built for command. An Eldari flagship. Elegant but terrifying in its purpose. "Looks like we've been noticed," Renner said, steeling herself. "Set course for that station in the asteroid field. We need to make contact with whoever's still alive out there. We're not dying here." With the Seraph closing in and the Eldari watching them like hawks, the Arceus limped toward the only refuge they could find. An ancient space station, hidden in the depths of a dead asteroid belt. And so, humanity's first steps into this broken galaxy were filled with fire, confusion, and a battle for survival. But they had made one thing clear. They weren't going to be a footnote in someone else's war. Not yet. The Arceus drifted toward the asteroid field, its hull groaning in protest, with every new jolt from the damaged engines. Commander Renner stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the screen, scanning the debris for any sign of the ancient station. The light from distant stars barely illuminated the dark void of the belt, but there was something unsettlingly familiar about the way the asteroid field seemed to swirl in patterns, like the dust of forgotten history, shifting in the breeze of time. Coordinates locked in. Commander, Ensign Wei reported, her voice a touch quieter than usual, as if unsure whether they'd even reached their destination. We're approaching the station, but it doesn't look like anyone's been here in centuries. Renner's hand tightened around the armrest. The station had been detected only by chance, buried deep in the asteroid field, cloaked by debris, and its original purpose a mystery. If the reports from the Orcs sensors were correct, it wasn't a military installation, nor a mining operation. This station had to be something older, something of the precursor era, the same race that was said to have ignited the wars between the galaxy's factions. Just keep us steady, Wei, Renner replied. We need answers, and this might be our only chance to get them. The crew had no choice but to rely on the station's technology for the answers they needed. They had no allies, no intel, and no idea what they might find. The Sarath were still out there, hunting them. The Eldari were watching. Time was against them. As the ship entered the outer perimeter of the station's debris field, the sensors began to ping erratically. A hidden force field, ancient and seemingly impenetrable, surrounded the station, shielding it from the destructive forces of the asteroid field. The crew had no choice but to land the Orcs near the outer docking port, where the magnetic fields weren't as intense. The landing was rough, but Renner breathed a sigh of relief as the ship's engines powered down. The crew's footsteps echoed in the quiet hallways of the abandoned station as they filed into their spacesuits and prepared to explore. This place gives me the creeps, Lieutenant Carter muttered, eyes scanning the walls, which were lined with darkened panels, once sophisticated, now covered in grime and dust. Renner gave him a sharp glance. Stay focused. We're here to find out who built this and what it can do. The answers are here. The air inside the station was stale but breathable. They moved cautiously through the labyrinth of hallways, each step deeper into the unknown. As they explored, it became apparent that the station had once been something magnificent, a nexus of technological advancement. Its corridors were lined with strange artifacts, alien symbols, and interfaces that flickered to life as the human crew activated them with their touch. Finally, they came to a central chamber, a massive circular room with a high ceiling. In the center of the room stood a towering structure, an obelisk-like device pulsating with faint rhythmic energy. It was unlike anything Renner had seen before, smooth, metallic, and glowing with an otherworldly light that pulsed like a heartbeat. What is it? Eli Novak, the ship's engineer, whispered, his voice tinged with awe. Renner stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the device. The moment she touched it, a surge of energy flooded through her, and the room was suddenly bathed in a brilliant, blinding light. The walls hummed with power, and an eerie voice, unintelligible but somehow familiar, echoed in the chamber. The galaxy is broken. Only one species shall reign. The voice faded as quickly as it had come, and the room fell silent once more. Renner pulled her hand away from the device, her heart pounding. What was that? Carter asked, his face pale. I don't know, Renner replied, still shaken. But whatever this is, it's not just an artifact. It's a warning. A sharp, familiar alarm sounded, cutting through the tense silence. A flashing red light pulsed above the entryway. Enemy ships incoming, Wei said, her voice tight with panic. The Sarath are here, and they've brought reinforcements. The message was clear. Their discovery had not gone unnoticed. The galaxy's ancient wars were no longer confined to history. They were alive. And now, humanity was in the thick of it. The Orcs shook as alarms blared through the halls of the station, and Commander Renner wasted no time. Move out, everyone. To the ship now. Her voice cut through the rising chaos as the crew scrambled to respond. The ancient station, once a hidden relic of the galaxy's lost past, was now a death trap. In the dim, flickering light of the station's corridors, the crew rushed toward the docking bay, their footsteps echoing off the metal floors. Renner, at the front, felt her heart race, not just from the danger, but from the unknown. The strange voice, the warning, the sense that whatever they'd discovered could change everything. Behind her, Eli Novik's voice was frantic, his usual calm replaced by urgency. "Commander, I don't know how much time we have. That device, it's not just a power source. It's a beacon. Something's drawn this Sarath in, and we're about to find out what." Renner didn't look back. She knew Novak was right. The Sarath were no strangers to aggressive tactics, and if they had already detected the pulse from the station, they wouldn't hesitate to attack. By the time they reached the Arceus, the outer docking bay was already shaking with the rumble of incoming Sarath vessels. Through the observation windows, Renner saw them. 3 massive insectoid ships, their sleek, segmented bodies casting long shadows across the station's surface. The Sarath weren't just here to intimidate. They were here to claim the station and its secrets for themselves. "Get us moving, Wei. Now," Renner barked as she climbed into the command seat. "We're not gonna outrun them," Wei replied, hands flying over the controls. "We'll have to fight." Renner felt a surge of frustration. They were no fleet of battle-hardened warriors. They were a group of survivors, only just beginning to understand the scope of what they'd uncovered. But desperation breeds innovation, and humanity had always thrived in the face of the impossible. "Deploy the pulse torpedoes. Now," Renner commanded. The pulse torpedoes had been a last-minute addition to the Arceus arsenal, homemade, crude devices designed to temporarily disrupt enemy systems. They weren't nearly as advanced as the weaponry the Sarath or Eldari wielded, but Renner had learned early in her career that ingenuity and surprise could turn the tide of any battle. With a sudden lurch, the ship fired its torpedoes. The first wave hit one of the Sarath ships head-on, sending a violent ripple of energy across its surface. Its weapon system sputtered, and for a moment, the ship seemed to stagger mid-flight. "Yes," Carter shouted from the weapons station. "It worked. We've disabled their targeting systems." But Renner wasn't celebrating just yet. The Sarath were relentless, and they wouldn't back down. The ship's hull groaned again as another wave of enemy fire slammed into the Arceus. It wasn't enough to breach the shields, but it was getting dangerously close. "We need a distraction. Something big," Renner muttered, thinking on her feet. "Eli, do you have anything left in the weapons locker that could give us an edge?" Eli, who had been frantically working on the ship's damaged systems, looked up, eyes alight with an idea. "I might. It's risky, but if we can overload the engine cores, just for a few seconds, we could create an electromagnetic pulse that might knock out their entire fleet's communications. It'll buy us time to escape." Renner's gaze locked on Eli's. "Do it." The crew worked quickly, knowing the risk. Eli's plan was a gamble, a desperate move that could either give them an opening to escape or leave them stranded in the cold void of space, exposed and vulnerable. But there was no other option. The Arceus was all they had. As Eli worked to reroute the engine systems, Renner's mind raced. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Humanity had unwittingly stepped into a war between ancient races, and now they were on the brink of being either swallowed by it or becoming the catalyst for its end. "Ready," Eli called, his voice strained with the weight of what was about to happen. Renner gave a sharp nod. "Do it." With a hiss of overload, the Arceus engines flared, sending a massive electromagnetic pulse rippling through the space around them. For a brief moment, all comms and weapon systems across the Sarath fleet went silent. The ships faltered, their precise targeting systems rendered useless. "Now, Wei, get us out of here," Renner shouted. The Arceus surged forward, its engines sputtering but still functioning. For a few precious seconds, they were free from the Sarath ships. But Renner knew that would not last. The Sarath were persistent, and the galaxy's wars had just begun to notice humanity's involvement. With one last glance at the battered station fading into the darkness behind them, Renner turned her focus forward. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since their arrival, the humans had given as good as they'd gotten. And that made all the difference. "Set course for the nearest uninhabited system," Renner ordered. "We need to regroup, find our bearings, and figure out what the hell we've just set in motion." The Arceus limped through the black void, its battered hull creaking with every movement. For the first time since their arrival in the galaxy, Commander Renner allowed herself a brief moment of reflection as she stood in the command deck, staring at the silent expanse before them. The Sarath had pulled back, for now, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they regrouped and attacked again. This galaxy was not kind to the unprepared. Humanity had barely survived their first taste of its fury, and Renner was certain that survival had made them a target. "Status report, Wei," she said, breaking the silence. Lieutenant Wei's face was tense, her eyes flicking over several readouts. "We've made it to the Lyra system. It's a remote sector, no known traffic, no major colonies, but the Arceus is barely holding together. Engine powers fluctuating. We need a proper repair bay if we're going to survive." Renner nodded grimly. "Find us one. I don't care if we have to barter or steal. We're not wasting time waiting for a safe harbor. This Azrath could be anywhere. We'll have to move fast. We don't have much time," Wei replied, her fingers dancing over the control panel. Renner's thoughts drifted as Wei began to plot their course, her eyes narrowing with concern. The mysterious precursor station, the warning, the device. It all felt like too much to process. It was as if humanity had stumbled into the middle of something far larger than any of them had imagined. But what? And who could they trust now? As if on cue, the comm system buzzed to life with a voice that immediately sent Renner's heart into a faster rhythm. "This is Captain Adeline Sorn of the Eldari warship Viruf. We have detected your vessel and require immediate communication." The voice was cool, regal, but laced with an edge of authority that left no room for refusal. "Your vessel has been in proximity to Eldari territory. We demand to know your intentions." Renner's mind raced. The Eldari, another enigmatic and powerful species in the galaxy's hierarchy, had been watching humanity closely since their arrival. If the Arceus had ventured too far into their claimed space, the consequences could be disastrous. But they couldn't afford to be intimidated. "Captain Sorn." Renner's voice was calm, measured, though she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "We are a human expedition, just trying to survive. We're not here to cause trouble. We've had some complications with the Sarath. We're requesting a neutral zone to make repairs and regroup." There was a long pause before the Eldari captain responded, her tone colder now. "Survival? Or have you become entangled in matters that are beyond your understanding? I will give you no sanctuary until I have your full cooperation." Renner's instincts flared. There was something about Sorn's words that didn't sit right. The Eldari were known for their aloofness, their reluctance to engage with lesser species. But this felt like a threat cloaked in diplomatic language. Before Renner could reply, the comms crackled again, this time with an unexpected voice. "Commander Renner, I have a proposition." It was Colonel Vasquez, her former superior from Earth's military, now a part of the independent faction they had forged within the Arceus. Renner's hand tightened around the armrest. She hadn't expected Vasquez to make contact. At least, not like this. "Vasquez, you've been silent for too long. What do you want?" The voice on the other end was clipped, urgent. "The Eldari are not to be trusted, Commander. They've been playing both sides of this war. I've uncovered intel. They know more about the precursor tech than they're letting on. And they know we have it. If you go to them for refuge, you may just be walking into a trap." Renner froze. The last few days had been a blur of survival, betrayal, and unknowns. But this was a game changer. The Eldari had always been a potential ally, a powerful one. But now, with Vasquez's warning, Renner realized that even the most alluring offers could mask darker motives. She turned to her crew, each of them watching her with varying degrees of concern. No one spoke, but it was clear they were all wondering the same thing. Who could they trust in this shattered galaxy? "Do you have proof of this, Colonel?" Renner's voice was steady, but inside, she could feel the weight of the decision hanging over her. "Not yet, but I have a contact, someone who knows more about the Eldari than they realize. If you want to stay alive, you'll need to meet with them." Discreetly, Renner's thoughts collided. This Azrath were still hunting them. The Eldari were watching them. And now, her own people were asking for a clandestine meeting with a potential mole. She had no choice but to make a move. "Very well. Set up the meeting, Vasquez. But if you're lying to me, I'll be the last person you ever speak to." The cold silence that followed her command was ominous. This galaxy was more dangerous than she'd ever anticipated. Renner knew one thing for certain. No one was truly safe, not even humanity, and certainly not among the stars. "Let's hope this contact knows more than we do," she murmured to herself. The galaxy's true power players were circling, and the game was about to become far more deadly. The Arceus drifted quietly through the Lyra system, its engines sputtering intermittently, each failing spark a reminder of how fragile their situation truly was. Renner paced the command deck, hands clasped behind her back, eyes flicking from the control panels to the distant stars beyond the viewport. The tension was palpable, thicker now than ever. The decision to follow Vasquez's lead, to meet with the mysterious contact, weighed heavily on her shoulders. Trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. "We've entered the coordinates, Commander." Lieutenant Wei's voice broke the silence, though it was laced with a note of uncertainty. "I've pinpointed the location Vasquez gave us. It's on an abandoned station near the edge of the system. It should be off any major trade routes, but it's also a long way from anything we can call safe." Renner nodded, not looking at her. She could feel the crew's unease. Their faith in the mission was being tested, but they had no choice. The galaxy they had entered was a labyrinth of broken empires and fractured alliances, where every step could lead them into a trap. And the Eldari's threats lingered in her mind, like a shadow she couldn't shake. "We'll move fast," Renner said, turning to the helm. "Plot the fastest course. If Vasquez is right, we don't have much time before the Eldari realize we're not playing by their rules." Ensign Carter, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "You think the Eldari will really attack us, Commander? After everything that's happened, they could help us." "They could help us, yes," Renner interrupted, her voice tight. "But they don't help anyone without a price. We've seen how they operate. They don't do favors. Whatever they know about the precursor tech, they're keeping it to themselves, and they're not the type to share knowledge easily. The Sarath are our immediate concern, but the Eldari might not be far behind." There was a murmur of agreement among the crew, though none spoke the words aloud. The message was clear. Humanity was caught in a web they didn't understand, and the Eldari were players who operated with motives of their own. As the Arceus sailed through the system, the minutes seemed to stretch on endlessly. The station Vasquez had mentioned was an old relic, abandoned, forgotten, and decaying. There were no signs of life, no signals, and no indication of its past purpose. It was as if the galaxy had turned its back on it long ago. The moment they approached the station, Renner's stomach tightened. The station itself was a grotesque shadow of its former self, crumbling metal and broken windows that didn't seem to reflect any artificial light. It was desolate. But amidst the decay, there was something else, something hidden, cloaked beneath layers of neglect. A signal, dim, faint, but undeniably there. "Found it," said Eli Novak, his voice sharp. "There's a hidden comm array in the station. It's active." Renner's eyes narrowed. "Bring it online. Let's hear what we're dealing with." Moments later, a low hum filled the bridge, followed by a crackling transmission. The voice that came through was distorted but unmistakable, a familiar tone, one Renner had never expected to hear again. "Commander Renner," Colonel Vasquez's voice came through the static, but there was something off about it. Tension was heavy in her words, and Renner could sense the unease beneath them. "We have a problem. I couldn't reach my contact in time. The Eldari have tracked us here. They're already in the system, and they know you're coming." Renner's heart skipped a beat. "You set us up," she growled, her grip tightening around the armrest. "No." Vasquez's voice was urgent now, tinged with panic. "I swear it, Commander. But I'm telling you, there's more at play here than we thought. The Eldari, they aren't just watching us. They know about the precursor tech. And they want it. They want it more than they want us alive." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only silence behind. Renner stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the weight of the words. The Eldari were playing a dangerous game, and now humanity was entangled in it, with no way out. "Prepare for immediate departure," Renner ordered, turning on her heel. "We've been made. The Eldari won't stop until they've got what they came for. We're not handing them the precursor tech. Not without a fight." We nodded, her fingers flying over the console as she began to maneuver the ship away from the station. But Renner knew that escape was a fleeting hope. If Vasquez's intel was correct, the Eldari weren't just in the system. They were likely already in pursuit, and their ship's speed and capabilities far exceeded that of the Arcus. The crew was ready for action, but as Renner stared out at the slowly advancing darkness of space, she realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. The galaxy wasn't a place of opportunities for the weak. It was a battlefield where the strongest survived, by whatever means necessary, and humanity, no matter how small and outmatched, was determined to stake their claim. But at what cost? The Arceus was already pushing its limits as it pulled away from the decaying station, its engines sputtering against the strain of the evasive maneuvers Renner had ordered. The hull groaned in protest as the ship lurched, narrowly avoiding the jagged debris that had once formed part of the station's outer structure. Out there, in the blackness of space, the Eldari were closing in, silent, calculating, and deadly. Renner stood at the bridge, her eyes scanning the incoming data from the sensors. They had managed to break free from the immediate threat. But the fact remained, the Eldari were no longer just observing. They were hunting. "We've got company," Wei said, her voice tinged with frustration as she worked the control panels. "At least 3 Eldari ships on an intercept course, and they're faster than we are. They'll have us in range within the hour." Renner clenched her fists. They were in a race against time. The Arceus was no warship. It was an exploration vessel, built for endurance, not combat. Its makeshift upgrades had bought them some time, but the reality of the situation was inescapable. The Eldari's technological superiority would tear them apart if they didn't act fast. "Can we get to the Nebula Forge?" Renner asked, turning toward Eli, who was working at a terminal to monitor the ship's engine stability. The Nebula Forge was a massive, uncharted gas giant, surrounded by dangerous asteroid fields. It was an ideal hiding spot, if they could get there undetected. Eli looked up, his face pale but determined. "I can push the engines to their max, but it'll put a lot of strain on the core. We'll need to make it there in one shot. If we don't, we're sitting ducks." "Then we'll make it," Renner said without hesitation. "Wei, plot the course. Novak, get to the engine room and help Eli." For a moment, no one spoke. The crew knew what Renner was asking of them. The Nebula Forge was a gamble, a dangerous gamble, but it was the only chance they had. "We'll need to run silent," Renner continued, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of tension in the air. "No emissions, no transmissions. If the Eldari detect us before we get to the forge, it's over." "I'm on it," Wei said, her fingers flying over the console as she input the new course. "I'll make sure the engines stay under the radar, but once we hit full throttle, it's going to be a bumpy ride." Renner nodded, her mind focused on the imminent battle. They had no choice now. Every moment spent sitting idle was a moment the Eldari could use to track them. As Eli and Novak hurried to the engine room, Renner took a deep breath, trying to push down the rising anxiety in her chest. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, and the Arceus was alone in its struggle. The station they'd discovered had unlocked something they hadn't yet understood, something powerful and perhaps destructive. Whatever the precursor technology held, it was the key to everything. And that was why the Eldari were hunting them. "We're not backing down," Renner whispered to herself. "Not now." The crew of the Arceus worked in unison, their movements tight and deliberate. Each of them understood the stakes. For humanity to survive, they needed to outsmart the galaxy's oldest and most ruthless powers. And for the first time, Renner realized that humanity's greatest asset wasn't just their ingenuity, it was their resolve. They had always been the underdogs. But if there was one thing humanity knew how to do, it was fight back. "We're going to make it," Renner said, more to herself than anyone else. "We have to." With the course set, the Arceus shot into motion, its engines flaring to life, propelling the ship toward the heart of the Nebula Forge. The vast gas giant loomed ahead, a swirling mass of dense clouds and electromagnetic fields. If they could reach the forge and navigate its labyrinth of asteroids, they could hide for long enough to regroup. But the Eldari were closing in, and Renner could almost feel the weight of their pursuit, like a predator stalking its prey. The race for survival had begun in earnest. And in this galaxy, only the cunning and the relentless survived. The question was no longer whether they could outrun their enemies. It was whether humanity could outthink them. The Arceus rocketed through the void, its hull straining against the desperate burst of speed. The Nebula Forge loomed ahead, a swirling, toxic maelstrom of gas and energy, a labyrinth of drifting asteroids and hidden electromagnetic anomalies. Renner felt a cold pit form in her stomach as she gazed at the swirling chaos ahead. It was their only chance, but even the forge wasn't a guarantee of safety. It was a place of constant danger, an inhospitable hell for those foolish enough to venture in. "We're entering the forge's gravitational field," Wei announced, her voice tense but focused. The stars outside the viewport blurred, replaced by the violent colors of the nebula. Gas clouds swirled around them, creating an eerie glow that painted the Arceus in a ghostly light. "Engage full stealth mode," Renner ordered. "Reduce power to everything except the life support and engines. No transmissions. We don't want the Eldari to find us before we can lose them." The Arceus power hum dropped to a near-silent thrum as the crew worked quickly to execute her commands. The starship's sleek, angular design blended better in the dark spaces of the nebula, but the threat from the Eldari wasn't just physical. They had the technology to track ships even in the most hostile environments, and Renner knew that every moment they spent in the nebula was a gamble. "Stealth systems active," Wei confirmed after a long moment. Her voice was steady, but Renner could hear the strain in it. The Arceus wasn't built for evasion. It was a research ship, not a war vessel. Even their best stealth efforts couldn't erase the massive energy signatures their engines left behind. The next few minutes were the longest Renner had ever experienced. The ship shook as it passed through swirling clouds of gas, the density of the nebula increasing with each passing second. They were flying blind now, unable to see anything but the occasional glint of an asteroid or the flash of gas igniting in the distance. Their sensors were near useless in the electromagnetic storm, and even the ship's artificial intelligence was strained under the pressure. "We're not going to make it." Carter's voice suddenly broke the silence, a note of panic creeping into his usually calm tone. "The Eldari are getting closer. They've already mapped our entry vector. They know where we are." Renner's heart sank, but she didn't show it. If they couldn't outrun them, the only option left was to make the Arceus' presence so unpredictable that the Eldari couldn't possibly track them. "Eli, Novak, can we alter our signature?" she asked, her mind racing. If we can't hide, maybe we can trick them. Already working on it, Commander, Eli replied over the comms, his voice tinged with focus. I'm trying to reroute some of the ship's energy through the auxiliary conduits, disrupting the power flow, so we can mask our signature. Renner had no illusions about the danger they were in. If they failed, the Eldari would find them quickly, and they didn't have the firepower to hold off a fleet of their size. Their best bet was to turn the Arceus into a ghost, something the Eldari couldn't track, couldn't target. But as the minutes passed, the sense of dread continued to build. There was something about the entire situation that gnawed at Renner's instincts. The Eldari were too calm, too controlled. They had expected this, whatever game they were playing. They weren't reacting out of panic. They were playing the long game, and that meant they knew something Renner didn't. The Arceus jolted suddenly, throwing Renner off balance. The lights flickered briefly, and the ship groaned as if it were a living creature in pain. Report. Renner snapped, catching herself on the console. We've hit a concentration of magnetic anomalies, Wei said quickly. It's scrambling our systems. They're not letting us move freely through the forge. Eli. Renner's voice was sharp. We're in a field of gravimetric distortions, Eli replied. We're being pulled in different directions, and the engines are having a hard time maintaining course. If this keeps up, we'll be stuck in here, at the mercy of whatever comes next. Then we make our own way, Renner said, her voice resolute. Wei, set a course. Fast, unpredictable. We're going to give the Eldari a run for their money. But as Wei began to input the commands, the viewports flickered. Renner's stomach dropped. Across the nebula, faint but unmistakable, was the silhouette of an Eldari ship. It had appeared without warning, emerging from a thick cluster of gas clouds. And it wasn't alone. 3 more ships, sleek and angular, followed behind, emerging from the darkness with deadly precision. Renner gripped the edge of her console. They weren't just hunting them. They were hurting them. We're boxed in, Wei said, her voice barely a whisper. Renner's eyes burned with resolve. Then we fight. With the nebula twisting around them, and the deadly precision of the Eldari closing in, the Arceus had reached the end of the line. The galaxy's deadliest players were all in the same arena now. The Arceus was caught in the grip of the nebula forge. The gravimetric distortions twisted space itself, pulling the ship in conflicting directions, the engines struggling to maintain any semblance of control. But Renner knew they couldn't afford to just drift. She stood at the center of the bridge, hands clenched, her mind calculating their dwindling options. We're being boxed in, Wei repeated, but there was no panic in her voice, just grim acknowledgement. The Eldari ships are circling us. We won't last long if we don't break free. Renner's gaze fixed on the viewport, where the Eldari ships drifted silently, their sleek forms like predators in the dark. They were waiting, patient, confident. They knew they had the advantage. But what the Eldari didn't know was that humanity had something they didn't: desperation. Eli, Novak, how are the engines? Renner asked, her voice cold but resolute. We're running at full capacity, Eli responded through the comms, his voice tense. But these distortions are messing with our systems. We're losing stability in the main drive. I can't guarantee we'll be able to punch through. Renner's mind raced. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. The Eldari ships were closing in, their weapons primed. The longer they hesitated, the more they risked being caught in a perfect trap. Get to the rear plasma conduits, Renner snapped, her eyes locking onto Novak. We're going to overload the main reactor. A shocked silence filled the bridge, but Renner's voice was unwavering. She knew what she was asking. Overloading the reactor would be risky. They could easily tear apart the Arceus. But if they didn't do something drastic, they wouldn't survive the next few minutes. Are you sure about this? Wei asked, her voice tight with concern. Do we have a choice? Renner replied. We're not making it out of here without some kind of trick. This is our shot. Eli's voice crackled over the comms. Understood, Commander. We'll prepare the plasma overload. But you better be ready to move fast. If the Eldari don't catch us, the explosion will. Noted, Renner said, swallowing hard. Prepare for immediate execution. Wei, plot a decoy route. We'll use the gravity anomalies to mask our trajectory and give them a false lead. Wei's fingers flew over the controls, the ship's course shifting erratically as she plotted their next move. The Arceus was already unstable, but now Renner was asking the crew to push it to the absolute limit. The Eldari ships, for all their tactical brilliance, couldn't predict the chaos they were about to unleash. Seconds passed like hours. Then, with a deep, rumbling groan, the Arceus shot forward, engines screaming in protest. The Eldari ships followed, eager to corner their prey, unaware of the deadly surprise lying in wait. Now, Renner barked. The overload sequence triggered. The rear plasma conduits flared with violent energy as Novak and Ely ignited the plasma core. The Arceus lurched, its frame rattling violently as the core neared critical mass. The ship was barely holding together, but it was enough to give them a fighting chance. A blinding flash of light erupted behind them as the reactor reached its peak. The Arceus surged forward, slipping through a gap in the asteroid field, the explosive force of the plasma burst creating a shockwave that momentarily scrambled the Eldari sensors. It was a gamble, but it worked. The Eldari ships were forced to maneuver, their careful approach thrown into disarray. For a brief moment, the Arceus felt like it was free, like it had slipped through the fingers of death itself. But Renner knew this wasn't over. The Eldari would recover quickly. They were too advanced, too precise. The explosion had only bought them minutes, maybe less. "Keep moving," Renner shouted. "Full evasive maneuvers. Wei, give me a course through the asteroid field. We'll lose them or die trying." The crew worked in sync, hands moving frantically across the controls. The ship jerked and shuddered as it veered through narrow gaps in the field of asteroids. The Eldari weren't far behind, their ships flashing with deadly energy weapons, but they were slowing, calculating their next move. The Arceus was fast, but the danger of colliding with the asteroid field was ever present. "Eldari ships are closing in on our tail," Wei reported. "They're adapting to our movements faster than expected." Renner's mind was racing, the pressure mounting with every passing second. She had one final card to play. It wasn't ideal, but it might give them the opening they needed. "Ely, Novak, can we trigger a final burst from the core? Something to give us a bigger lead." Renner's voice was low, but there was a cold edge to it. There was a pause, then Ely's voice came through, tinged with urgency. "If we do that, Commander, we're at maximum risk of losing the entire ship. The core will go critical in a matter of seconds." "I know," Renner said. "Do it anyway." With a last defiant roar, the Arceus shot forward, its engines screaming as they pushed the limits of the core. The asteroids blurred past, the Eldari closing in for the kill, but the Arceus was faster now. Unpredictable, erratic. It was their last chance. The galaxy was watching, and Renner was ready to make the final move. If humanity was to survive, it would not be as a passive player. They would fight, they would outsmart their enemies, and they would win.